I'll just stand. Is it okay if I stand here, sir? Hi, buddy. Welcome back. All right. Well, we still got 30 seconds. Do I need to do? Oh, this is the mic here.
Yeah.
Shall we get started? Welcome, everyone. I'm Rick Lochtenberg, currently the acting mayor for the month while Mayor Dooley is away. Thank you, Councillor Woodward. So I'd like to welcome you all to our budget open house and presentation. It'll be led by our CAO, Kevin Cormack, and our CFO, Colin McClure. And I'm really excited for those of you who were able to make it and our counselors who are here to answer questions afterwards. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to CAO Cormack. Do you got it?
All right. Thanks, Councillor Lochtenberg, Acting Mayor. This is our annual open house for the budget presentation, and this year we've decided to live stream it to make this available to those that can't make it here in person. So my part of the presentation is really to go over council priorities. We're in that transition period where this council still trying to move forward on some of the priorities of the past council, doing some shaping over this budget session, and they are meeting mid-April to set new priorities for their term of council. So I'll just highlight a few of the areas. The city has 4 overarching strategic goals. The first is excellence in city governance. This includes strategic partnerships, fiscal responsibility, managing our assets, those areas. So in terms of this area, some of the new things that have come up is this Thursday, there'll be a major announcement from TELUS, the provincial government, and the city regarding infrastructure renewal in our community. And this is an example of needing and working on those strategic partnerships. A strong goal was to work with our regional partners, and we've been really fortunate this year that the regional district has recognized that a number of city parks are used regionally and are looking at contributing funding towards it. Colin will speak a little bit more to that in his presentation. Emergency management was another strong goal, and again, working with our regional district partners and actually the city of Castlegar, we're looking at a partnership where all 3 partners, the city of Nelson, the city of Castlegar, and the regional district of Central Kootenay, will all be involved in emergency management and strengthen that program across the region. And part of that, again, we're reducing some of our contribution at the regional level and converting that to a more of a focus here in the city of Nelson. West Kootenay Transit System, I think, is a really good example, and it is still touted across the province as a very good model that communities can work together. And again, there's a partnership between 3 local governments, in that case the Regional District of Central Kootenay, Regional District of Kootenay Boundary, and the City of Nelson. All 3 of us operate our transit systems and fund those transit systems. But as from a consumer point of view, there's one transit system. That's all the consumer needs to see. It's our job behind the scenes to make that work. And recently at a West Kootenay Transit meeting, it was identified that Nelson has the highest ridership per capita outside Victoria. That doesn't include the Metro Vancouver area, but any of the regional transit systems outside of the Lower Mainland and Victoria. And I think we're 29 riders per capita, and Victoria is 31. So we're almost on par with what we're seeing in Victoria. We continue to support our employees through professional development. Collective agreements have been negotiated at or near inflationary levels, and we've worked really hard with our unions to make things work for both the taxpayer and our employees. Tax and fees have been held to these similar levels, inflationary levels, and we continue to develop new revenues, pay down debts, and build reserves. And again, Colin will go more into that. Our second overarching goal was strengthening neighborhoods, and a lot of this is around housing and neighborhoods. So 3 affordable housing projects were announced in 2018. That will add over 125 units of the low-end market rental housing, and some of that will be actually subsidized housing. A housing strategy review was completed. We're still exploring potential housing on top of the youth center. There's 125 units of private assisted living units that will be built in what we call the Vernon Street Hole, so across from the Adventure Hotel. Laneway housing program has been successful, and we're right in the midst of developing pre-approved designs to reduce the time frame to get your project approved. Short-term rentals, again, that was another area of focus, and we probably have the highest compliance in the province, if not North America. All our short-term rentals have licenses and are regulated. I think communities have less than 4% in other communities. And we also see strong private sector development, and that goes from multifamily condo development. We see multifamily rentals being built, and we see a lot of single-family infill. Connecting neighborhoods is, again, a primary goal of council. Railtown plan has been developed, the rezoning's in place, and we're working with a major private landowner on a project that he's trying to bring forward. We've made improvements to Cottonwood Park. New stage will be installed this year. There's a new plaza area for the market. The downtown public realm planning improvements are ongoing. The International Mural Festival was a real hit last year, and year 2 will happen this year. Baker Street lighting was well received by the community. The completion of Hall Street happened to the waterfront. There'll be some tweaks this summer, but it'll be a great new amenity. And again, we see strong development in the downtown from a project like the Redfish Grill that has been empty for many years to added residential on other buildings there. Third goal was sustainable city services and infrastructure. This focuses around renewal of city infrastructure. Again, this council has supported to continue investment in our infrastructure, and if you see the panels around this room, you'll see the amount of work we've done. And not only are we doing a lot of this work, we're actually doing it very cost effectively. We've seen savings up to 50% on our water main replacement work, and on the relining work, again, we've seen savings at that level. This council's supported an increase in the paving program and facility renewal. They've also received a report on flood hazard risk in our community, and that identifies some pretty major capital improvements that will be required. They've also supported us hiring an engineering student to complete a full retaining wall inventory, and those are probably some infrastructure that most of us don't pay attention to, but we have a number of retaining walls across the city. And then some of our smaller infrastructure this year, our underground sprinkler systems were front and center, and those systems are anywhere between $250,000 and $500,000 to replace some of those systems, and they're aging, and this budget again includes some funding for that. The sewage treatment plant, again, some major work was identified on that. We're struggling with some high effluent in our system, which is causing problems at the plant, but we're working with our local businesses and trying to identify strategies to deal with that. Water is a big priority of council, and again, this council supported that, so they're In 2019, we're doing the planning work to bring all our 3 water systems together at Mountain Station. That includes Sellis, Anderson, and 5 Mile. And the capital work will start in 2020. The emergency source intake has been installed, and we're working with Interior Health on commissioning that. We're still focusing on conservation, and again, council supported an ambassador again for this year, and part of their job is to work with community on reducing many things, including how much water we use, how much food waste we produce, encouraging energy conservation, and the community Fire Smart program. The water master plan was updated, and it's identified many of the improvements we've made. Certainly the reduction in water uses that we're experiencing, but with the drought conditions we're facing, there's still more work to be done on that. And it does make another recommendation on finding a secondary source of water to protect the community in the event of a major wildfire, drought, etc. And also under that area was emergency management review. That was completed by our fire chief, who has he's one of the few certified emergency managers in the country, and came from Calgary with a wealth of experience there, and did a complete review of our plan and made a number of recommendations, which the previous council adopted, but this council is supporting. And as I mentioned, we're building a new model with the regional district and the city of Castlegar. And finally, the last area was expand local jobs and local prosperity. We've landed a new major tech company. Attraction on Demand is bringing part of their company to Nelson. They bought the Legion building and doing renovations there. In the interim, we'll be making space available to them in this building. And the Nelson Innovation Center is a project that's been supported again. This council has allocated $30,000 to that, and is looking at if we can lease space on the 5th floor, supporting that with those rentals. They're also working with the Columbia Basin Trust to see some investment in that. We're also seeing quite a bit of interest in our building on 610 Railway Street, both from the tech sector and others. Nelson was recognized as one of the top intelligent communities in the world, and recognized as in the top 5 in communities under 50,000. The recent BC Tech Summit, we had 3 councillors attend, and there was a lot of interest and hype around Nelson and the Kootenay region, what we're doing here. Nelson Fiber continues to expand. This has been a real benefit to get us not only on the map, but also support our local internet providers such as Columbia Wireless, DHC, and CBBC, as well as clients such as School District 8 and others. So that's really where we are with just a few highlights of the priorities and the successes and challenges that we're facing. And as I said, Colin will get into those in a little bit more detail with the budget presentation. So thank you, and I'll turn it over to our CFO.
Thanks, Kevin. All right, well, thank you for council and staff and a couple of public that have come to join us. I'm hoping that more of you are watching us online. And so today we're here, as we do annually, to present the financial plan, and it runs from 2019 to 2023. Mostly we're going to discuss the highlights of what we've gone through here. It's always a bit challenging on years of council elections, in that because of the timing when the election is, we are usually already full swing in budget with the council and when they're in their 4-year mandate. It's a bit harder for new councils to come in, and we've got quite a turnover with our council. Quite young, enthusiastic group, and they ask lots of good questions. But it also means that we need to get them up to speed on the multiple things that the city is doing, and so that makes things a bit later than we would be in a normal year. So For tonight, I'm going to go over these, and I don't know, we have question sheets here available for those that are in the public, but at the end of the presentation, which I believe is also online, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, it is, so you can follow along with the actual slides as well if you download that. There is a email address there, so if there are questions that people have, feel free to email me those, and I'll get back to you as best as I can, and we will also compile those for council questions and answers that are provided from the public. So a few things here. We've kind of already had the introduction from our acting mayor, Mr. Lautenberg, and from CAO Cormac. And we'll go through the next steps here. We had our strategic plan, which again will go through an update here now. Council has a date, April, I believe 12th and 13th. We're going to get together. There'll likely be some changes, but I think more of a tweaking when I look at strategic plans, because I think, and I believe anyway, that they find what we have now is a very good plan. However, I think that they've got some ideas of their own that they would like to see us to work on, and so I look forward to seeing how that plays out, and for staff to be able to make these things a possibility. Again, Kevin had spoken about this, about the four overarching strategic goals that we have, and gave a short update. I will move on to where we are for the financial plan. Again, one thing that's important for the public to understand is that we have been having ongoing meetings. There's meetings with staff that start most cases in the late September, October region, and then we move on to going through and finding out what we can actually achieve in a year, what the asks are, where there are areas that we can be efficient. And then we bring that to council, and we have a number. We had, I believe, 6 presentations with council. Those, again, are always open to the public. And from there, we then come to this place where we now open it up to the public. So here is the opportunity for the public consultation. And this is the opportunity for the public, if there are things that they want to see or haven't seen or want council to be aware of, or concerns that they have. In most cases, you would have been able here today to talk, because we have the majority of council here. But again, the opportunity at the end of today's presentation to be able to email me and or come into the city. Make myself available, and there's also opportunities just even at the front at reception to write any questions that you might have about budget that I will also attend to. But to be clear, the public consultation component is then brought back to council, so we're not done yet. And we will probably have to have another meeting just with some of the changes that we've seen since the last time we got together. And we'll discuss that a little bit later in the presentation, but it will also be clear that if you do send an email or a comment in, that it will be collated and brought to council as part of the budget decision when we get to doing the bylaws for both the financial plan and for the tax rate. Again, so in our environment right now, we are pretty fortunate in BC that we have a pretty robust economy overall, and we're looking at about a 2.9% increase in 2019. We do see some shifting and downloading from the province onto municipalities, and that's a challenge for us to take those on. We also know that we are cognizant that we want to be sustainable in however we operate at the city. In particular, you know, we look at opportunities of, and you'll see them later, about some lighting upgrades, places that we can save energy, and we can also cut down our GHG, but also be able to save money. So each year, and again, most of this comes out of the strategic direction that we are given. And in most cases, we have a really large meeting at the beginning of the mandate of council that they can sort of set what they like to see happen in the next 4 years. And then we do revisit it over time, but mostly these are the marching orders that staff get, and we try to work with them. Over time, and I don't see this necessarily changing with this council, but there is definitely a support by council for delivering this through municipal services. That means we've got municipal staff, delivering these services, your snow plowing and other areas that could be contracted out. We look to do our best to make sure that those are provided by our municipal employees. We'd like to keep our service levels at 2018 levels. We also want to look where we can for efficiencies in delivery, and we look for opportunities. We are a very entrepreneurial city. When you look at the cities that are municipalities across this province, I would say that we are one of the top ones as far as, again, a fiber plant, some of the work that I do in contracting out services, financial services to the small municipalities in the areas. Again, we also have our general hydro manager, Alex Love, does do work for Grand Forks, which then helps support his wage. And again, it would be very difficult for a small municipality like Grand Forks to have the expertise of an Alex Love. And so there's a win-win for both parties in that relationship. There's a definite concern about tax increases, and again, wherever possible, we like to keep them as a minimum. Long-term planning is a focus, and you'll see that, and I think council has seen that with the spreadsheets that we show on our water and sewer in particular. We go out 20 years and we have a sense of what revenues we need and what capital is going to be coming up over time. We definitely have also been dealing with the utilities in particular. We've been very successful in. It was quite painful, I believe, for the taxpayer about 10 years ago when there was a doubling of the fees, but we have been there's been a very positive result in that we've been able to tackle a number of the infrastructure deficits we had in utilities, and we are now in a more maintenance and not in a reactionary, but we're in a forward thinking of our utilities and how we want to be better at them. How do we get the best for it? We're not in an infrastructure deficit that we were when we first began, and so that's again a tip of the hat to those councils that would have been in the day to have made that decision, and for the councils that have followed that have continued on that path. In the same way, in the last couple of years, the previous council put funds towards our roads, and we're going to see, I think, the benefit of that over the next couple of years, because we are seeing a lift in what we plan to do in the amount of paving in through our community. We have a number of roads that need to be upgraded, and that should happen, and you'll see, I think, a significant change in the next couple of years. Of course, we always want to be looking at implementing our sustainability principles. So, a couple of quick facts about operational revenue for the whole city. So that's including your water and your sewer, your hydro and operations is about 46 million. Our total operational expense is about 39 million. And you say, okay, well, there's a difference there. Well, the difference, the revenue over expenses go to pay down debt, and they also flow into the reserves. The general fund operational expenses is about $22 million, of which about 10.4 million is in taxation. So when we have a situation in operating where taxation is basically the only tool the council has to cover any inflationary or any type of cost increases in our operations, taxation is the real tool that they have. They can ask the government for more grants, but that's not something that they are likely to be successful on. However, they do know that they can change what amount of tax that they charge to the residential and business community, and from there, that's what funds mostly our operations. As you can see, it's about a 2-to-1 ratio. So the challenge, of course, for staff and council is that when you have $22 million in operational expenses, if you have a 1% increase, just even inflationary, that means you need a 2% increase on taxation to cover those costs. A 1% taxation increase provides about $90,000 to the city. We do get a significant dividend that comes from Nelson Hydro, and if the city was not to have that dividend, the outfall of that would be about a 32% increase in taxation from what we get. We are the only municipality in Western Canada that generates, now that's water generation, power, and distributes it. We have about 171 regular employees. Quick breakdown here. I won't go over if you've got the slides, but you can see where our revenue sources come from. Again, too, at the top there is taxation. Sales of services will be other items like where you've got business licenses, development permit fees, other things like that. Again, grants. In most cases, we've got the small community grant, which is about $300,000. We also get a significant grant from BC Transit for their portion of funding our transit system. Again, the sewer and water user fees, as well as hydro being a significant component there. On the other slide, we've got operational expenses. Again, your general government, which is going to be your admin costs, IT, finance, those sorts of things. Police and bylaw, I think, are pretty straightforward. Fire services, development, engineering. Again, transit being at 1.5 million. You see the library, and then you also see Nelson Hydro. About 12 million, about half of that is actually power purchase costs that come from Fortis. So when you think about how we deal with the power, one of our major costs is whatever happens with Fortis and whatever cost pressures they are feeling or whatever rate increases they need to do, they pass that on to us because we buy. We produce about 50% of the power that we use, and so we need to buy about 50%. So 5-year financial plan, kind of an idea here on funding sources. You can see from the slide that in most cases, you got your debts and grants will be able to be funding your general, your water, sewer, hydro, and waste. The same as the user fee. So that makes sense if you are using hydro that you would pay your hydro bill. Same as you've got your sewer and water rates, you get one fee for that when you pay that. Taxation, as you can see, is the real tool that funds into the general source of funding. So a couple of highlights or budget overview here for 2019. We're expecting about $79,000 in new construction revenue. New construction revenue is where we've got an empty lot and someone builds a home on that. That increases revenue to the city. It's not based on assessed value. When assessed values go up, that does not mean that the city generates more income because assessments have gone up. We'll talk about that a little bit later. We were proposing a 2% tax increase. However, in working with our partners at the RDCK, in a different kind of some proposed funding changes with regional parks, with them, our partners in the regional parks looking on bringing in a number of parks, some city, some in the regional district area of E, as well as Area G and a park in Samo. So some of that will provide some funding opportunity for the city. And we'll talk a bit about that later. Council has not met since some of these deliberations have gone on with the regional district and their budget process, and we will meet in the next few weeks, and from there, council will have an opportunity to decide what they want to do with some of these funding sources. In the Water and Sewer Fund, we had a unique situation where we've been fortunate enough to get a $6 million grant to deal with the water system being consolidated and going through our main reservoir, and that has allowed us, because we've also found that we've got some pretty major cost increases in our sewage treatment plant. So what council decided this year, and to keep things in an inflationary level at a 1.75% increase overall in your water and sewer utility rates, was that we would lower your water rates and increase the sewer. Because of the major grant and some of the positive work that we've been happening inside the water fund, we're able to have a lower fee for a while here as we continue on with the good work there, and increase the revenues that we need in the sewer fund because we've got some cost pressures, in particular at the sewage treatment plant. We're looking at a hydro rate increase that'll be effective here at the end of this month, or for April 1st, of a 1.5% for urban and 2.94% for rural. Again, we have not had a change in garbage and recycling fees. We also, again, have a pretty significant capital plan, $15.8 million, and that's across all, whether that's hydro, sewer, water, or utilities. Again, maybe sometimes repetitive, but sometimes charts are good as far as a visual. We had the list there of sort of where the operating budget revenues come from. Again, very clearly you can see that the major component of that is 54% comes from taxes. So every year we basically start off in a bit of a behind the eight ball, most of that relating to the fact that there's inflationary costs that are associated with the city each year. And from that, we have to then take into account, what are the ups and downs, again, being proactive, and we'll speak a bit about that on revenue sources. And then we've also got some expense challenges. So again, I spoke earlier about the new development and that creating new taxation, which is about $79,000. We've also seen some increases in the grant in lieu of taxes, and those would be for provincial or federal buildings that are not taxable, but they provide a revenue source to the city, so they pay a grant instead of taxation to us, and we've had an increase in that. The Youth Center has taken over the parkade, and that was after a very positive run by Mr. Jim Reimer on running that facility for quite a while. But there was an opportunity to have the Youth Center group take that over. It's a good opportunity for training for their staff and a revenue source that assists in making sure that it is not, as least as possible, subsidized by the taxpayer. And so we're expecting about a $90,000 increase in revenue from the operations of the parkade. And again, it would come to no surprise with all the development expected to happen within Nelson, in particular the very large projects, and that doesn't, and we have kind of a set amount for small family dwellings as well, or smaller developments. But we are looking at an increase of about $125,000 over and above what we had last year of $170,000 in building permits. So we're looking at about $295,000 in building permit revenue for both 2019 and 2020, and that relating to some of these significant projects that we have coming. Now, one of the challenges for the youth center is that we do have a lot of grant money that flows through that. The youth center was very successful in doing the youth employment program, but one of the changes happened is that the new contract for those types of grants had come out, and it was taken on by a party. They were successful locally, KCDS, a great group that were successful in being the proponent, and they've decided that they are going to handle the employment center operations themselves, the youth side of it. They do not just youth, they do adult and special needs as well, but they've decided to take that on, so that's a loss to the youth center itself. So you can see that that's a bit of a pinch point for us this year. Again, the net proposed funding from regional parks, understanding that when there's taxation that comes from the regional district, or when you are being taxed in the regional district, that the regional district taxes the city of Nelson residential and commercial properties, as well as the other areas that are involved in whatever service. Now, if it's a general service, that means all parties of the regional district are being taxed, and the city pays about 22% of that. But in some of the smaller services, for example, the Rec Commission that operates the NDCC, or even like regional parks, where we have some, different partners there, the city's assessed value as the total amount there is about between 50 and 55%. So when we have a taxation happening in one of those services, they're taxing our city and commercial properties as well, residential and city properties. So when we talk about net proposed funding from regional parks, that would be a new funding source, not from Nelson residential taxpayer. The other piece that we had seen is that an increase in our parking meter revenue. Part of that's with some of the commuter zones that we've set up, or just overall increase in parking stalls that we put in, doing angle in a number of spots, and that's been about a $60,000 increase expected based on prior 2018 actuals. So that's the revenue side, which was again very positive. On the other side here, we've got some expenditures as well, that some cost pressures that we need to deal with. One of them is that to have a temporary summer beat officer. We've also, council's been looking into and approving an increase to public works staff for a graveyard shift, so we can have a full 24-hour operation, which again, the city definitely is 24 hours a day. So this is an opportunity, I think, to provide service. Having a number of employees on during the evening, again, will allow us to get some work that we can't get done, say on the downtown because of parking and whatnot. This will allow them, I think, a better opportunity to have full streets to be able to clean up. And I think that we hope to see the results of that over the next year. The one thing is that we had a savings, is that it's about $20,000 in election expenses. So in 2019, we've already had our election. 2018, we can remove that for the year. One thing that we do see is that, and that I think is important for our public to know, is that when you are putting that money in that meter, the meter revenue goes to two funds. One is the capital projects, which we then use for paving and sidewalk work. It also goes into the downtown waterfront reserve, so some of the upgrades to the different parts of downtown, this is where this funding source goes to. So I think it's important when we tell the public that the increase in parking revenue of $60,000, that $60,000 then doesn't become just in general operations for things, that it goes actually back into that reserve, which then helps us, again, with some of the significant capital program that we have, and in particular for 2019 and 20, some significant paving that we have planned. The other piece that shouldn't be lost on people is that having all of these projects, we were really struggling at having a 1.5 time bylaw officers, and so we were fortunate enough and successful in getting a full-time individual. We had a relationship before with the regional district where we shared someone. We realized that we needed one person additional full-time, and so we were able to do that, but that comes at a cost. So when you look at the balance after revenues and expense adjustments, we're about $32,000 in the hole, and we have proposed a $180,000 tax increase, which is 2% at the $90,000. And that leaves us currently, before discussing with council, but because of this work with our partners at the regional district and that funding models, about $148,000 surplus currently. Again, there'll be discussions later on where that would go. Likelihood is that because of our regional parks, there certainly staff recommendation would be to use that funding to increase the parks, in particular some of the Rosemont ones. We have a new one now at the end of Hall Street, so we're going to need some funding to be able to make sure that those don't just get overgrown with weeds and that we're able to maintain them at a high level. So, taxation. Who does the city collect taxes for? Well, we collect taxes, so when you get your city tax notice, we are collecting, yes, on behalf of the city, but we also collect on behalf of the province for the school. We also collect on behalf of our regional district partners, and we also for the school taxes, and additional to that for the hospital. Assessments are a popular topic right now, especially when people opened up their assessed values, and we'll get a couple shots of that in a couple slides here just to see what a change that we saw, in particular in residential. It was significant, but we'll alleviate any fears on, I think, on that, resulting in some huge tax increase. It won't necessarily, depending on where you lie on the average amount of increase your property had. You will see a shifting if your assessed value went up much higher than the average, then you're going to get the shifting of your taxation from someone's home that did not go up as much as yours. So the assessed value, though, is what we use then to provide the tax rate, also known as the mill rate, and when we apply those two, that's where we get our tax revenue. So when we look at what our collections are for the entire city, you can see that the city of Nelson, out of the $23 million, about $10 million comes into the city. You can see the school tax at 8, RDCK at 4, regional hospital at 7, and then the BCAA, which is BC Assessment, and the Municipal Finance Authority also picking up $153,000. So BC Assessment is a at arm's length third party provincial crown corporation, and they determine the market value of all the properties in BC. And after they figure out what classification that you're in, whether or not you're in class 1 for residential, class 6 for business and or other, and or whether you're major industry, which we don't really have here in the city of Nelson. But in addition to that, they deal with whether or not you're a non-for-profit property or light industry. Tax revenue, growth, where does it come from? New revenue only exists when there is a new assessment. Increase in inventory, as I spoke before, someone takes a bare lot, builds a home on it, that increases our taxation. General increases in the market value do not generate more tax dollars for the city. The past couple of years, we have seen a moderate level of new growth from new revenues from growth, that is. And so we have about $78,000 last year, $79,000 this year. So again, it's not close to 1%, and it is helpful, but it's not. A couple of years ago, we were in the $250-some-odd-thousand range, and that was because we had a new building, for example, like Nelson Commons come online. So market changes. I thought this slide was, again, a good visual way to get a sense on what we've been seeing here over time. And again, you can see we were pretty low there as far as our assessed values back in 2014 and 15. And then you've seen residential up almost 15% when you look at the rate change from almost 2015 up into that level. And again, you can see that commercial also had a good lift, but has also started to tail down a bit. I thought this slide was also very telling. And so this slide, and it may be difficult to read because it's small on some of your slides, I don't know. But I just wanted to make, the viewers and the public here, just to be witness to that there was such a big increase this year that 67% of all residential properties had an increase of 15% or more. And so that's quite significant. And again, the bar graph, and again on the side is sort of your folio count number of homes, and then sort of showing you how many homes and what percentage of increase along the bottom there. In the same boat, we can see that on the commercial side, that 86% of all commercial properties had an increase of 5% or less. So when this happens, that can lead to some shifting, and I'll talk to you again about that. When I say shifting, meaning that if you have assessed values of residential going up higher and higher, and you don't adjust the collections from the parties that we have, and mostly in the city, we're about 75% residential, 25% commercial. And the way that we adjust or make that to stay static each year is that we use a mill rate. So we use a multiple rate, and that is common to be able to keep the sharing ratio at the 25-75. If, for example, with a 16% average increase for home prices and only a 5% on the commercial side, if we didn't make a change in the multiple rate, that would mean that the residential would probably start to pick up 80% of the taxation and 20% for the commercial party. So that's why we use that tool as a multiple. And again, you can see overall change on this slide here that the overall change for residential average 16.35%. Some of the other ones here, smaller utilities and light industry, but business being at 5.68. Now, the mill rate, we show this just to give a sense of business class multiples. I think it's important as well at the very bottom that I added this year is that the provincial rate is for the business class is 2.45, and that is set. It has been set ever since I've been here. I asked the CAO, he said it's been here ever since. That rate has not changed in the whole time that we've been here. And there's an effect on that. Now, in 2018, you can see the different relationships between multiples, and many times the multiple rate will have an effect on how low your taxation is, and again what relationship you have. A lot of these places may or may not have heavy industry. When they do, sometimes that allows for a lower multiple rate because residential and commercial end up being subsidized or helped out, I guess I should say, with the larger major industries providing a large portion of taxation revenue. We don't really have that here in the city of Nelson, and so we kind of keep it a pretty low level at 2.1. Now, for 2019, I'm projecting that multiple will go to 2.3, but that's only because right now we're at about a 4.5 in our residential rate, and at the 2.1, that results in a 9-point-something rate for business. And with a 16% increase in our assessed values, that will really lower what our mill rate will be, because when we collect our taxation, we take the new assessed values. We say we collected this much taxation last year. So on the new assessed values, the first starting point is we take the new assessed values and then divide that through the amount of money that we needed for 2018, and that's our starting point. So what will likely mean is that instead of having a 4.5% mill rate to start with, we'll be likely down at 4. So then from there, you would have whatever tax increase put on top of that. So we allow for a balancing to make sure that we are only collecting the amount of taxation that we would have collected in 2018 based on the new assessed values. So again, that's me trying to reiterate that if your rate goes up, it just does. If we left it there, if we did just say, okay, we're going to keep the tax rate as is, then yes, you would see a significant increase in taxation revenue, but we don't, we bring it down. So one thing that's happening with these kind of multiple rates that the city will do, which will keep that sharing ratio of 75% basically residential and 25% commercial. What you do see is changes on the multiple rate that the province uses, and theirs has been at 2.45, and so that's been used for being able to have the sharing ratio of taxation for whatever our DCK requisition is, the hospital and the school districts and school taxes. So from there, as an example, when we calculated out what we are expecting from the regional district, because their multiplier does not change year after year, we are seeing a shifting. So on the residential side, in 2018, there was a 60% coverage of the regional district taxes was by residential. In 2019, that will move up to 65. So again, without having that multiple to share that ratio, that means that there will be a bit of a break to the commercial taxpayer, and the residential taxpayer will pick up that difference because they don't adjust their mill rate. Hopefully, I know it's a bit of a confusing topic, but I just thought it was important to know because when people see their tax notices, they may have some questions. And this is where that shifting goes on. So again, if you have a home that's gone up 25%, the likelihood is that you're going to see a tax increase greater then obviously the person that's at the average, if your home went up 16%, you're likely to be right in the middle there, not much of a change other than whatever tax increase happens. But if you're at 5%, it's an increase in your assessed value, you're likely to see kind of a drop in your taxes that will then be picked up by the person that's, again, in that 25% increase in their assessed value. And so that's where that shifting goes on. Again, here's me just showing you sort of that flavor for our split is for how we assess or levy our taxes. So again, just reiterating kind of that breakdown on a single family dwelling, average home, your City of Nelson taxes about almost $1,700, school taxes at $855, RDCK $541, regional hospital, and we get down to a total of $3,210 for your average home. Now, again, one thing that has to be noted as well, that this does not show if you own the home and you get the the homeowner grant. The homeowner grant is $770 if you are under 65, and it's $1,040 if you're over. So that's something that can offset the cost of the taxes on the overall tax burden for your property. So again, taking a bit of I guess a projection here or recommendation from staff with the new funding coming in from regional parks, it being at the dollar amount it almost amounts to a 2% increase of our taxpayer. So, and again, when I say that, because the regional parks will be taxing the City of Nelson taxpayer and then providing that to the city, it's the same way as us, providing taxation ourselves to our own homeowners. So if we were to have the regional district tax and also us tax, it would be sort of a double taxing. Now again, on this particular situation, because of this relationship with regional parks and providing some funding, we, city, are recommending that we would have a 0% tax increase in the city, on the city's taxation, because that taxation will be coming and being funded through the regional district. So that's why you're seeing, based on an average single-family home now, which is at $455,000, which again is a significant amount of money, but that is what basically the average home for 2019 is. So the other part here is just, again, visually showing you the difference between your sewer and water fees. You can see your water rates were $549 in 2018, and that's dropped to $357, whereas your sewer rate's gone from $469 to $680. And the overall change there is about $19, which is about 1.75% increase. The resource recovery here, we sort of do at $118. However, to be note, you pay $40 on your utility bill, and then we were assuming that one bag tagged a week, so one bag at $1.50 times 52 weeks, and then when the math works together, you get 118, so 68 and the 40. So again, having another look on this one, before on that single family dwelling, I was looking at a home just that it was sort of all of your municipal taxes and your utility fees. This particular slide is showing you what's happening with your property taxes only. So when you get your property tax notice piece, what changes you should expect. If you're on that perfect home that is exactly the average price change, if that's who you are, that your house went up exactly that amount, this is a sort of an effect you would see. And again, on that proposing of a 0 tax percent increase for the municipal side, you can see there's no change. However, the regional tax requisition will be going up $77. We're seeing that the West Kootenay Hospital is up about $9. We're not expecting much change in the BCAA or the MFA. And school taxes, we don't tend to find out what that will be until much later in early May is when we find out what that amount is, and they just give us that number. Thought process for me though is that, again, on the residential side, the residential pay into the school district 8 catchment area. So when you've got homes averaging in Nelson going up 16%, likely some of the other catchment areas whether it's Slocan or say Caslow, we know that they would have some increases, but not likely at the same level. So again, more of that shifting will happen because of the excess value increase in Area E and Area F, and the city will likely carry more of the expectation of what the school taxes is. So I think that we may see an increase, but right now we've left it at 0 because we don't know what the actual rate is from the province. Okay, same slide basically, but just sort of showing you what the percentage change is year over year. So we've also, in the last number of years, been trying to showing the effect on what happens, again, with a commercial building. We estimate the effect on $1 million. Again, we looked at a commercial restaurant because of how the sewer and water fees follow out from that. Again, with the expectation of a 5% increase, that means that a business that was, commercial business that was in at $950 is now $1 million. You can see that change of $50,000. You can see that no expected change on the property taxes, but you see the water and sewer rates, about $54 is the change for a commercial property. Again, we show the slide. It's sort of one, it doesn't change very much each year, but it does kind of give you that split on what's happening with your general budget expenditures. You can see our general government 18 and police at 18, fire at 9, transportation service. Again, when we say that, that's mostly your roads, it's your snow plowing, it's dealing with those sorts of items that relate to transportation in the community. Recreation and culture, obviously that's our parks budget. And then you can also see that we have quite a significant amount of money that gets contributed to reserves each year, but then that's also available to be able to fund a very robust capital program each year. Again, CAO Cormac did speak to the success of transit, and we have really seen some positive numbers coming out. And increase in ridership, and again, full buses going back and forth. Certainly, the West Kootenay transit relationship there has been really beneficial, and we're starting to see synergies. Where now for your 225, you can ride the bus all the way from Balfour to Trail, which is fantastic. And that increased ridership, though, has its some pressure points, and we're seeing some maintenance costs on some of our buses, but we're also seeing some increase in our revenue fares, so those are somewhat offsetting. Based on the 2018 budget, we do have a pretty good increase. Some of that relates to fuel, some of that relates to fleet maintenance, and some leasing cost increases. But we're also seeing that our fares are actually having a big jump. And one thing that happens on the relationship is about 47% of the transit budget is covered by a grant from BC Transit. Then the regional district and the city partner in our particular areas for the transit system, but the city and the regional district share on the fare revenue. And so that's where you can see that coming in as a revenue source. BC Transit doesn't take that. They do provide the grant, but they also allow us to keep that revenue. And you can see, based on the current year budget, the increase in fares and the contribution from on the grant side, that we have a slight increase over last year. And again, too, I think it speaks volumes. However, I do note that with the increased ridership, what you start to see is some pressure points on buses and size of buses. And when you have success, which is great, it's hard not to say, hey, get to the bus stop and we can't pick you up. Now we start having a problem. And when you start saying, well, we need to have 2 buses there, until you start to get that second bus filled up again, you start to have a cost pressure, because now you've got that additional service coming, and yet maybe not the ridership yet. And so anyway, we'll see what happens, and our staff and the staff at BC Transit look and try to see which areas that we can tweak. Are there different runs that we can do? How we handle some of the pressures that we're seeing on the positive of ridership. Again, our capital plan. So for 2019, we got about $7.8 million in the water, sewer, and hydro. Again, we have some ongoing water line replacement and our secondary source work. Again, our relining, we've been very successful. That pricing and the ingenuity and of the relining of sewer pipes, where now before they had to could only do certain sections. Now they can go around corners. They've really improved how they do that product. And because more people have gotten, or more businesses have got into providing that service, it's really dropped the cost as well compared to even when we started doing it 8 years ago, 9 years ago. So that price has come down. So we're actually able to do more relining for less money. So that's very positive, and that's been very helpful in keeping our funds being efficiently used. On the general side, we have a significant paving program expected for 2019. Also some sidewalk and retaining work. We do have some building improvements. There's a significant program to go on up at the police library building with some new HVAC systems, and as well the roof needs to be replaced. We also have vehicle replacements. We've got a new fire truck to be purchased, and so that's something that we're working on right now, and we expect to be able to have that. And but they're an expensive vehicle to buy, but we do annually put money into the reserve so that as we use these vehicles, not just these vehicles, but our snow plows, our excavators, loaders, dump trucks, we put money aside each year based on their usage, and that allows that fund to be able to be available to resource whatever capital infrastructure or whatever capital equipment improvements we need to make each year. We also have significant park improvements, as the CEO spoke to earlier, really hoping to finish up the Cottonwood Park with the band shell and the farmers market being all wrapped up. I think it'll be quite fantastic. We're also planning on having a new washroom put in down there as well. Okay, our proposed facility program for 2018 and 19. Oops, sorry, I jumped that too quick. One of the things that we found in the current year, and it probably wasn't uncommon for someone even in the residential or commercial side trying to get contractors. They were pretty fully subscribed, and that meant that we didn't get as much of our capital work that we had hoped to have got done. We do have, again, an ambitious program for 2019, and we have had some definitely some good results early because we've been trying to get in front of tenders before most of the contractors are being fully subscribed. So we're hoping to see some results on that. You can see in 2019, we've been able to put the profit from this building here goes into the building reserve. There's also some additional money that comes from the water license reserve. Previous council bumped up to $300,000. It goes into the reserve. But you can also see that we're averaging in between $1.5 and $2 million a year on capital investment required to keep our buildings up to snuff. So one of our big things for the 2018 facility highlights was dealing with the Civic, and we were able to do a major upgrade in there for the electrical system, and we also were able to deal with the fire panel. So now when the fire alarm goes off at the fire hall, they can now see which building it is instead of coming to the building and finding out, oh, we're actually at the curling club, or we need to go to the soccer indoor facility. So all of that now is being arranged so that now they will be able to get a reading when they get the alarm and to know which area to go to immediately. So I think that's very positive. So one of the major projects for 2019 will be the revitalization of the old Coke and Gas Works building. Again, you can see it's built in the 1900s, has historical value, and we were very fortunate to get a significant grant for Heritage Grant, and of course that's coming through the CBT, which is just a fantastic funder for not just the city, but across the whole entire region. And we're very fortunate to have that, and that's going to allow us to do up restoration of the original windows and get the repointing of the brick. So another one is an ongoing work here, and this is where some of the sustainability comes in, changing out our lights and going to LED. We're seeing significant savings in power, and we're also seeing that come as a way to pay for itself. And so we've got here Government Place, our 310 ward, trying to get through all these floors and changing out our windows, changing out our lighting upgrades. In addition to, we have the police and library are also going to go through a major revamp on their lights as well. And I spoke to this a bit earlier. The police and library is getting quite a bit of love this year, and the roof and mechanical system being upgraded. And again, too, I think that will be very important on cutting down on our GHGs and being more efficient in the use of the heating of the building. So one of the things that we show on our slides here is sort of the idea that on the accounting side of the world, we show our buildings in our financial statements at cost because that is the proper accounting method for it. But what I think is important for the community to realize is that what is the actual cost we had to replace these? And obviously it didn't surprise someone that buildings that are built in 1900, if you have to replace them and do repointing, that 2019 price is going to be quite a bit higher. But just giving you a sense there, just on the orange being what the replacement cost is for our buildings, and it's quite significant. Now, again, we don't ever expect to have all our buildings need to be replaced all at once, but you can see that the price increases from what the original cost was. And so how do we fund our capital? So a surplus. We talk about a surplus because it happens each year. We were just talking as we are wrapping up the 2018 year end. If on a $40 million budget, if you're 99% accurate, that means you could be $400,000 to the good or $400,000 to the bad. And so in budgeting here, there can be an unexpected surplus, whether that comes from a windfall of additional revenues coming from, say, interest income. That might be a place where you get a surplus. And then the question is, what do you do with that surplus? Because it is one time. And so we tend, at the city, our goal is to put that into a surplus area. You might put it into your unrestricted surplus, or you might put it in one of your reserves. And then one of the reserves being, because those are where you're funding your one-time purchases, whether or not it's a capital upgrade. What you don't want to see is, or to rely on that, or using surpluses to either not have a tax increase or to fund operations, because once you use it, then it's gone, and then you're going to be looking for more money the next time. Again, I just kind of talked about this on how we should spend that general surplus or our reserve. It's a good tool for non-recurring items, like I said before, capital. Yes, again, same idea here that we should never use surpluses to fund things on the short term, because then you just end up in a problem later. Statutory reserves, these are ones that are set up by bylaw. So from the bylaw, you get a sense of what you need to spend that money on. So there will be a certain formula that's related to, but it'll say on the utility, say for example, the water infrastructure fund, I can't buy a new dump truck with that money. I have to use that money on a water infrastructure, whether or not that's the water plant, water line replacement, those sorts of things can get funded that way. So again, statutory reserves tells us where that money is supposed to go, and it also tells us what projects we can spend it on. And again, you've got a few examples there, water license, capital projects. So the other thing that we will see is that past councils have appropriated certain surpluses into amounts that don't necessarily have that same requirement of having a bylaw on how it's used. Again, some of these we talk about is the recycling reserve that we have. We've got a couple there for insurance and legal in case we had a situation where we might want to self-assure on a situation rather than going through our insurance company. So we've had an opportunity, a windfall, and we have put money aside to be able to fund things like that. At the end of 2017, our appropriated surplus was about $2.6 million. So at the city, we do have some significant debt, but we also note that, especially in particular in the general fund, that debt is funded by third parties. So again, it is one of those things that's very valuable for debt. And again, with the Municipal Finance Authority, we are able to get extremely low rates for borrowing at this point in time, and that can be a really valuable tool when you're going to upgrade a system that's going to maybe last 50 or 60 years. To go and borrow for 20 or 30 years over that time makes a lot of sense. And the city has done that, and I give you an example of one that we've done where we've worked with, say, Selkirk College, where they had a $6 million upgrade to Mary Hall. And we worked with them, we took on the loan, and they pay the principal and interest payments. So that would be a situation where we've used our ability to borrow to upgrade a facility that then allows a vocational school like Selkirk College to have a fantastic place to be able to educate kids at, keep kids in our community, generate jobs, generate opportunities, and allow them to help fund that debt. So right now we have about $14.4 million in general and utility debt. And out of that, about half of that is general debt, but out of that general debt, only $1.1 million of that actually is paid through general taxation. So the other side, you can see here what happens on our general capital funding. Well, you can see the majority of it, actually more than a majority of it, 67% of it basically comes from our statutory reserves. So that would be your equipment reserve, your capital reserve, and your utility reserves for all of hydro, water, and sewer. One common reserve, and we point this out because it's sort of a catch-all for all of the departments that don't really have the ability to generate their own revenue, and it's the water license reserve. And you can see we've been successful in being able to do a number of capital projects over the last number of years, whether or not it's in the information side of the house, be able to do some sidewalks, parks works, or buildings. It could be another place for upgrades for police and fire as well. We did the radios recently. And this is a great source, and it comes through a relationship on dealing with a hydro license that we had, and it's a funding source that has been very positive in the community in upgrading and keeping our buildings, parks, etc. up to standard. Just giving you some ideas here on how much we spent and what the plan is over the next few years. You'll get an idea there from the different sources on how much money is allocated to some of the different areas in our operations of the city. Again, I spoke to this earlier, the capital reserve. So you can see that this is where all your parking meter revenue goes. Not all of it, the majority of it, 93% of it. And this is also where we spend the biggest amount of money on roads and paving and sidewalk work. And you can see in 2019 the amount that we plan to do. Now I think about 1.450 is relating to roads this year. We've got some retaining wall work, and you can also see that in 2020 we've got about 1.6 million that we're hoping to do in paving in 2020. So you can see that those 2 years we've got some significant road work that we're going to do, and then you can see it kind of dip back down in 421 onwards. Now, some of the questions that we get is, why are you putting money into reserves? And I think this slide can speak to, it's kind of a culmination of some of the slides that we had earlier. Here's what the replacement cost is of dealing with all of your water assets. Here's what the historical cost is. You can see that it's not quite double from what the historical cost is. Here's what the reserve balance is, and here's what our annual contribution is. And you can see that where the reserve balance is, it's great that we even have some, and that we've been tackling a lot of the infrastructure problems that we have. But you can see that each year, even putting the money into it, we're spending that money and more in certain years, and then other years we're able to allow it to grow. But it's important to have the reserves there to be able to have an ongoing funding source, to be able to keep that we don't go back into infrastructure deficit. You can see in certain places where the reserve building, like for example, the building reserve is still not really in a healthy spot. We would hope over time that we can get there. I think that we are getting to places where under the sewer, water, and hydro, where those have been really focused on, that we're successful in having a pretty good balance there. Now, you don't want to have too much, but you also don't. You want to be able to be reactive, like we were this year when we found out about what was happening in the sewer STP plant, and being able to reallocate with the funding that we had, and keeping again the cost to the taxpayer at an inflationary level. Again, debt payments trend line is our next one. You can see it's pretty significant here for 2019 and 2020, and then 2021 it comes down. That's because we got a number of large debts that are coming off the books, in particular the one that Selkirk College will be one, and also the Fortis grant as well will be one, or the Fortis piping will be another one. Otherwise, you can see that they're pretty consistent and at a pretty low level for a number of years. Our statutory reserves. You can see that we've got some pretty good positive balances right now, and in most cases we're trying to keep in a place where we're close, but understanding that there will be times that the reserve will be drawn down quite low, and then we will allow it to build up the other side. And you see that happening in the equipment reserve, and also in some of the other capital and roads like that, where we've got a number of years here where we're going to use it up pretty quickly, and then hopefully let it grow up a bit again as we take a breather and look forward to finding out what new projects we can use the funds on. Okay, I hope you guys are holding with me here. We're going to go over the water utility. Again, we just noted that we've got the water master plan. Long-term planning is critical here, and really something to see from 10 years ago, I guess it's 11 years ago now, the original water master plan, the idea that we should be able to eliminate what's going on with our galvanized because we were having all kinds of water leakages, and we've replaced all of that galvanized pipe now. And so now we're going on to other repairs, but we are noticing significant savings in water consumption, in particular because the galvanized, once it got a hole in it, it just leaked very poorly, and it was a great source of water loss for us. So it's great that we're tapping into that. Again, water conservation. We will have an ambassador out talking to you, our community, over the summer in particular. That's when we really see the spike in water usage. And hopefully we'll, again, get the great results that we've been getting from our residents when we have drought-like conditions. There will be some work that we're planning to do on some additional commercial metering, mostly for data collection, so the council can be aware of where the water usage is coming from. So we're rolling that out for 2019. Again, we talked about this, that there was a 2% increase in the rates for 2019. However, your overall rate went down because we reallocated to sewer. And we have ongoing an inflationary increase for water rates for the next 10 years at 2%. Sorry, I guess I was on the right slide. I thought this particular slide was visually kind of spoke to what we're doing here, in the sense that here's what our rates are. We're dropping them for a number of years, and then we will do the flip-flop, and we'll see that on the offset for the sewer. But again, great that we had some reserves, great that you have the flexibility to be able to assist one utility over another when you run into a surprise. Again, some of the highlights for our water fund: the user fees about 2.5 million, operating costs are about 1.4. We don't have a lot of debt service in the water utility itself, and no planning in debt until 2024. We have about $1.8 million in upgrades expected, $1 million in water main. We're working on the secondary source planning this year. In 2020 is when we will really see that plan come to fruition, we would hope. Again, ICI metering, ICI being institutional, commercial, and industrial. That's what that means. We've got some metering going on there. Most of the capital is funded through user fees and government grants. Like I said, we received that $6 million grant, which we'll use over the next 3 years to upgrade our water system. Again, strategic direction here, sewer master plan. It will be coming up in the next near future for a renewal or review of the plan itself. We've done a lot of good work there. Realigning, as we noted, the improved technology has really cut the cost of dealing with a sewer. It's actually quite fantastic. If we ever thought about having to dig up all those sewer lines and replace them, the cost of that would just be exorbitant. And to have this fantastic technology that allows us to do that right in place has saved us a lot of money. In 2019 here, Council approved a 1.5% rate increase. However, with the rate reallocation, they increased the rates by $211. As I said before, was offset by the $192 decrease in your water rate. And looking for sewer, we have a proposed 1.5% increase over the next 10 years. Again, kind of the opposite of the grant we just saw, where we've got a spike and then for a number of years, and then it dropping back down as we deal with the capital costs related to the sewage treatment plant. Again, for 2019, the sewer utility, we've got a user fees of about $4.4 million, and we knew that that's higher than it has been in the past, as expected. Operating costs of 1.9, which allows us to put the difference into some debt servicing. Again, not a lot of debt in sewer as well. We've been able to kind of contain most of what we're doing here just with inflationary increases. Although if we are needing to have a major upgrade, because we are looking at what's happening at the sewage treatment plant with the higher effluent that we're receiving out there. What will we do? How will we handle that? We may need to borrow. For 2019, we've got some, again, realigning going on. We have some STP upgrades of $700,000. And then there's also the airport lift station and grit chamber project going on. Again, this being funded for the next few years in 2019 to 23 under user fees, but depending on what happens on the assessment of the sewage treatment plant, we may need to borrow. Okay, so a resource recovery, which again is a nice way of saying garbage and recycling, and composting. So the waste function is based on a user fee basis model. Each year, the household pays for that collection. In 2019, and as in the years past, there has been no increase to the fees. So again, that's $40 off of your utility bill, and then you bag a tag. So for each garbage bag you use, you're supposed to put your orange tag on it, and that orange tag is $1.50. The city right now, with its relationship with Recycle BC, is getting $142,000 annually to collect recycling, and currently that revenue is flows into operations. In 2019, the city signed a 5-year contract with Recycle BC. One of the major factors in signing that is that we now have to eliminate the use of a single-use blue bag for collection by July of 2020. That is at the same time that we got end of life of our garbage truck and the idea of composting, and so staff and council are looking through what is the best way forward. What kind of truck do we need? How will we collect our recycling if we're not using blue bag? Will we have bins? So those are questions that we'll be having, and we'll be out to stakeholders as well. And then the other question here is that the council and staff are looking for a made in Nelson solution to composting, and there's more to come there, and I think working with our partners as well. But there's been some really positive and exciting ideas about how we might be able to do composting here in Nelson, and we think that that would really be helpful on our tipping fees for garbage, because if we can get the recycling or get the composting material out of our garbage, which is likely heavier and wetter, and we can compost that, then that will drive down the weight on our drop off of our garbage. We're on the home stretch, guys. Hydro utility. Again, too, we've got a number of strategic objectives here of providing safe and efficient generation, distribution, and sale of electrical energy. We got our strategic business strategic business priorities. We have a district energy plan that we're looking into, and we are investigating new small hydro generation. Again, for 2018, we had some significant capital achievements. We were able to rebuild a number of lines of transmission lines. We were able to do some North Shore work, which now allows, if we have a power outage in town from a loss of our feed from either our plant or even from Fortis, we're actually now able to run the power coming the other way, which we weren't able to do before, because there's another transmission station up at Coffee Creek, so we can now flow power back that way, where we didn't have that ability before. So if it went down outside of town here, then we were done. And so now we've got an ability not to bring everybody up, but to be able to limit the cause and effect of a power outage. We also, and the public may have been seeing, there's preparation right now to be able to run a number of submarine cables. We have cables that actually run underneath on Lakeside by the dock down by Lakeside Park, and they go across the other side, and that's our power. So we have a number of, that plan has been designed, and in 2019 here we'll be able to develop that. We had a number of work again done on the power plant. We've been checking out the penstocks and doing concrete work out there, being able to make it safe, but also increasing the capacity. So again, pretty significant, robust capital projects for 2019, about $3.5 million. We've got ongoing pole replacements. I just spoke about the submarine cable that we're going to do. We've also got some power plant upgrades where we've got some wood decking to replace, and as well as a bridge deck to replacement. There's also some switchgear being taken out, dealt with at the Lakeside Terminal, and a new voltage regulator at 6 Mile Sub. For 2019, the operating budget is $18.7 million. Expenses overall, just operating expenses, about $5 million. You can see, as I spoke earlier, about $6.7 million are power purchases. We have about $500,000 each year on debt transfers, debt payments, I should say, and then the remainder goes into the hydro reserve, which then again ongoing assists in paying the capital upgrades as we go on into the future. At the same time, there's about a $2.8 million grant that comes into the city. We get $658,000 from hydro to that water license reserve we spoke to, and we also assist in about $90,000 that is then matched with the operational revenues from the city that go to the operations of the Nelson District. operations of the NDCC. We put the slide up here to kind of give a sense of where we sit on the urban side for our hydro, because I think it's important at certain rates. There can be different bands, and a forest may be lower if you're a really low user of hydro, and yet in most cases the average usage is about 1,000, and you can see where Nelson Hydro fits right in line there, with a little bit lower than BC Hydro and quite a bit lower than Fortis. Again here, oh, here we go. Someone thought it was going to be over. So again, idea here based on 2019, because now we've got a change this year in the rural rate proposing. We've asked BCUC to have a bit of a higher rate for the rural utility this year. The major reason is that we have significant vegetation management there. When you have 20 poles going to one home versus say one pole servicing 20 homes in an urban setting, that becomes one of the challenges. On the rural side, if you've got those 20 poles, we've had a lot of windstorms and other challenges in the last little while, and trees have been coming down on the power, so we have a real concerted effort to increase significantly our vegetation management, which will improve the operations and the reliability of power for the rural community. But that does come at a cost, and so we're trying to recognize that the rural areas in certain situations cost more, and that's one of the reasons why we would have a change in what the rate is that is charged for power in those areas, helping them pay for the cost of maintaining the infrastructure in that area. That's it. So we don't have too many public here, but you're more than welcome to come and ask any questions, or I'll take any questions. Yes.
I have a question. The overview hydro utilities investigating new small hydro generation. Like, is that in the city of Nelson, or is that's the location of the hydro dams?
So there's a few different opportunities. And again, a lot of them have to do with being grant covered to be funding. So again, the question was, if the public didn't hear, is what kind of ideas do we have for small hydro generation? So again, I have a couple ideas. We're looking at being able to, as one idea here, is bringing in the water from 5 Mile and Sellis Creek and being able to bring that into our mountain station. So the question was, would there be an ability up in that area to use that water coming in? Could we, in bringing it there, because it's quite a long run, could we use, could we provide or look into generating water, generating electricity off bringing that water in? That is one of the ones that we've looked at. We've also looked at Groman across the way. So these are all just, again, in the phases of finding out whether or not they're feasible. One that we've talked about, and we have put in the ability in some of our pressure reducing valves, because when we have water coming down from Mountain Station, you can imagine the power and the pressure that it generates. So there are certain places in town where we have big concrete buildings that allow that water to pound in there and settle before, because if you had too much pressure, you would just blow everyone's house as their water tanks or those sort of things would go. So we have looked at and put in some space to be able to have on those pressure reducing valves as well, be able to put little generators in there to see if we get some electricity. Right now it's not necessarily feasible, but we are looking at grants that would. But those are a few examples. Again, I'm not the best person to speak about that, but and again, if you have more questions on that, we could get you that information.
Yeah, Paul, sorry. I'm always interested in the retaining walls in Nelson. So as you look under general capital projects to do, among other things, retaining wall improvements, just to highlight that there might also be a heritage value and a historical value in the reveal of some of the heritage walls that we have, and perhaps an opportunity to bring that to bear through the engineering report as well.
Okay. Take that under advisement. Yes.
I was just curious, when we do, this is debt and debt servicing, when we take on a third party
Yes.
Do we get like a positive debt record for holding that debt? Like you would when you borrow and you pay it off, you get your debt record is improved. Do we get that when a third party pays off a debt, or do they get that?
Oh, well, no, I think that, again, it's a little bit different. And one of the models when we borrow through the Municipal Finance Authority is that they take it's a bit of a different model. You're not necessarily going and looking at a Royal Bank for your borrowing, where you would want to show that you have this sort of credibility. The Municipal Finance Authority takes basically all the assets of the province, all the municipal assets, I should say, or regional district assets, and they use that to create a bond. And then that bond goes out to, when they have borrowing from municipalities, and they say overall the municipalities want to borrow $10 million, then they'll go to the market and say, these municipalities need this money. And they will take the asset value of all of the municipalities, and today it generates a AAA credit rating because it has such value, which means that the rate that is charged for those that need to hold a security at such a high value is quite low. And so from there, they then, on the same side, and this is this great function of this Municipal Finance Authority, is that they then take the payments, which are broken into principal and interest, and they take the interest component to pay off what would be required by the bond that they've got on the market. But they take the principal payments and they try to reinvest them. So if you've got a AAA bond out there the last couple of years, say at 1%, if they can earn 2% or higher, then that additional revenue comes back to help pay down the debt itself. So again, it's a bit of a different model than what you would be thinking about wanting to have a credit rating with a bank and being concerned that if you're paying someone else's debt, who actually gets the benefit of that. We're not really in that particular industry. We've kind of got our own industry, our own co-op, I guess you would say, under the Municipal Finance Authority.
So I was just wondering about risk for the city when we do third-party debt like that.
Sure. And again, to be clear, the city owns the land and again, it's leased again to our partner at Selkirk College. But in one sense, dealing with another public entity like that, yes, there's an opportunity for risk on that level, but because they're sort of backstopped by the provincial government, I think the comfort of the day was that we should be able to do this and build that asset for our community.
And the other one was the Fortis agreement, the security we took back with the gas distribution system in the cities that we registered a charge against. Most of those assets, not all of them. So some people will see that when they're going to sell their property. We have a charge on that gas line that goes through, potentially goes through some private property. And so that's the security we took when we did that one.
Yes.
There's one more thing I couldn't understand, and it's overview sewer utility, airport lift station, grid changer.
Yeah.
What is that?
Okay, so it's a great question. So again, sometimes we indicate where certain properties are on kind of what location they're at. So this particular lift station is at the airport. So thinking about
Okay, so
it's
sewer.
yes, it's a sewer, yes, but it's a sewer. And it's being lifted out to the plant because it has to
Okay,
yeah.
okay, got it.
All right, not hearing any more questions. I bid you adieu, public that are watching by the internet, and thanks for joining us. And again, email right there, and feel free to send me any questions you might have. And thank you and good night.